Welcome to another edition of A Voice to the Gentile Church. I'm Jim Wingerter. Next to me is Pastor Roger Diaz, and next to him is Dolores Lowe. So, our illustrious president is up to all kinds of stuff. I missed the speech yesterday, so I'm going to assume a lot of our listeners may have missed it also.
Yeah, so, it never ceases to amaze me. Obama once said that never underestimate how badly Joe Biden could mess things up, and he didn't use the word mess. But he did say that. And yesterday he gave a speech where he talked about how this was an optimum time, an inflection point in history when things can change, and there's going to be a new world order, and America has to lead it. And he talked, his evidence was how in between 1910 and 1946, 60 million people died.
Right.
And how that was the impetus for a new liberal world order that came into being, right? So sort of like kind of saying that it was a good thing that 60 million people died.
Of course.
Right.
We've talked about that on this program, and it's surreal, actually, to come to a place to hear these people openly make these declarations. World War I and II, they were both part of a great plan to shift into a new future, a new world order. So it lends itself to what we've been saying all along. I've been considered a conspiracy buff and so on. All those things have been thrown at me.
That's not a spoiler alert.
But the truth is, these things are real. These conspiracy has been hatched out, and now being exposed. So I'm just amazed. I'm not surprised, but I am amazed that it's being so boldly declared.
Yep. Between him and Klaus Schwab, they're both out there. That
Klaus
guy. Schwab actually wrote a book.
That guy.
And that was the title, The New World Order, The Great Reset, right?
But keep in mind that Obama, for the last 4 years of his ministry, my goodness, of his ministry to the New World Order,
Right.
He kept saying it. He kept talking about using that catchphrase, sustainable growth, and that the time has come to push towards sustainable growth over and over and over. He went to Europe, and he was eloquent and charismatic, and he would say these things, and people would just be oohing and ahhing over his eloquence. But he was saying the things of the United Nations that they've been saying for a long time, speaking concerning depopulation, world population control, sustainable growth. But the thing with Biden, the difference with Biden and Obama is Biden has no eloquence.
Nope.
He's not charismatic. He just puts his foot in his mouth constantly. And when he says something, he reveals more of the agenda than Obama ever did. So he's like just spewing things and exposing more and more of that broader agenda.
Yep.
I think across the presidents, we've seen a continual stating and restating. Just the term New World Order has been used repeatedly. George H.W. Bush used it all the time.
Yep.
But before him, Richard Nixon and his attaché Henry Kissinger were promoting it left and right. Back when we were going, what is he talking about?
Yep.
So remember Kennedy, right? Kennedy stood up against secret organizations and global secret orders and so on, and he spoke out against it. Profoundly, he died.
Yeah,
right?
Maybe that's why.
And following Kennedy, every president, with the exception of Donald Trump, pushed that agenda. Every one of them.
Right.
Even
Doesn't
Ford,
matter if they're Republican or Democrat.
Even Ford did it.
Yes. Right.
Jimmy Carter did it.
Yep.
Reagan did it. They all pushed that solid agenda of a new world order, and Trump was the only one who didn't, and lo and behold, the system crushed him.
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing is Biden is flying to Europe this week.
God help Europe.
To speak to Europe, right? At the same time, yesterday afternoon, Zelensky called for a new Europe led by France. And then at the same time, I saw a tweet by a Chinese government official who said, when the West speaks about his world history and world changes, they only speak about this. And it was a map of North America and Europe. Yeah. So the Chinese are not on board with it. We know the Russians aren't on board with it because there's a war going on right now. Even Ukraine is going, let's have France lead us, because nobody's taking Biden seriously as a leader at this point, right?
Seems evident.
Yeah.
I mean, we didn't, but we thought we were quite the minority.
Yes.
You know, we've said it on the program before. I think 3 weeks ago was the last program we did. We took a hiatus. It's amazing to see people on the left that are supposed to be liberals, that are supposed to be progressives, de facto supporting a nuclear war.
Yep.
It's
They are.
amazing to see it.
Yep.
And I looked at a little clip from CNN yesterday with what's Blitzer?
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
What's his first
Wolf
name?
Blitzer.
Wolf Blitzer.
He might be
And
German.
He was almost salivating over the intensification of the conflict. And I'm saying, wow, look at this. It used to be that the conservatives were the hawks, right?
Right,
You
yeah.
gotta watch those conservatives. They're gonna bring on a nuclear war,
Yeah.
which we knew then. I knew then it was a lie, but now the lie has become fully manifest. That it's the people on the left, the progressives, that are pushing this agenda.
Yep.
So
which
I'm
is starting,
going to
right?
reiterate that the Agenda 21 goal is a population of 500 million. And although that sounds like a lot of people, that's 6.5 billion people less than there are right now.
Yeah.
That's roughly the number of people that died between World War I and II. Probably more than that, but yeah, these people are insidious, just putrid people. On the day of judgment, God's judgment will be just. What can I say? Any good news?
Nope, not yet. No. And you know how, so I am of the opinion that everything in the news cycle is just a shiny object to distract you from something else going
Absolutely,
on. Right?
absolutely.
So not many people are paying attention, but we do have a Supreme Court nominee that's going through confirmation hearings right now. She's a lovely person who was unable to define what a woman is on the board of a school that teaches CRT, doesn't know whether a baby in the womb at 20 weeks feels pain. So just a lovely individual all around, right? Now, mind you, when they do operations on babies in the womb at 20 weeks, you know, to fix some sort of defect that can be fixed through surgery,
Right.
they apply anesthetic.
Right.
Because they know that it will, that the fetus will feel pain.
Well, they've seen the reaction of the children via sonograms, how they react to even being touched or being pressed upon from outside.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the thing is, she not only you know, when they asked her if she could define a woman, her answer was, "I'm not a biologist." And I wanted to say, you know, as one of our friends said, then how do we know that Biden nominated a woman, right? Because you can't tell what a woman
Right.
is. But it would have been so simple as to say me, right? I'm a woman, right? But she couldn't even do that.
Well, that's for the sake of all the transgenders who are trying to establish an identity.
Yep.
What's happening? Well, we knew it would happen, but what's happening with professional sports now?
Oh my God! So you know, I used to coach girls volleyball, right? And now the NCAA can't make up its mind what to do with transgenders, or not allow transgenders. So we have the transgender woman swimmer, right?
Right.
Who has defeated every woman. She
Big
won
shoulders.
the NCAA national championships. To a point that it's just ridiculous, right? And
Right.
now I coach volleyball. And volleyball between girls and boys can be dangerous because boys are just so much stronger, right?
Upper body strength.
Upper
Yeah.
body strength.
Right.
Right.
And when they put that ball down, it comes down really hard, right? Plus, a men's net is 6 inches taller than a woman's net. So now you're going to have a man playing on a woman's net, which is 6 inches lower. His vertical is so much higher. His strength is so much stronger, right? So it's ridiculous, right? They're destroying women's sports.
Right.
They're destroying opportunities
Right.
for women to get
They're,
scholarships.
right.
Right? So, and the sad thing is, the women who are fighting it are alone. Because all those women organizations
Very
never shut up,
Right.
you know?
Very unpopular.
Right. Now, all those organizations that are always harping, they're not saying anything. they're being quiet. Because I don't know if it's fear because the transgender agenda is moving so far, so strength,
Right.
or they really are on board with this wokeism, right? It's stupid to say that a man can be, even with drugs that suppress your hormones, their upper body is just their upper body. It's
Right.
going to be stronger, right?
I
Which is
see that
evidence.
there was a terrorist attack in Beersheba yesterday in Israel. I think it was yesterday. 4 people murdered with a knife. The terrorist was neutralized, from what I saw. And yet, of course, the people on the left in Israel are squawking about it. He was shot down mercilessly in the street. And as it happened, someone was recording it, and he was recorded saying, Yofi, 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 meaning beautiful, beautiful, wonderful, as the terrorist was shot down. So there's an uproar in Israel about the fact that these radical settlers took joy in killing this Bedouin Palestinian, but he did that after he mercilessly murdered 4 people. So it just goes to show that there's such a horrible double standard,
Oh, yes.
in Israel.
So interesting enough, though, back to the transgender agenda. In Ukraine, transgenders are trying to get out of the country, right? We've seen all these tweets, all these Instagram.
Try to get away from the subject, but
No, sorry. Sorry.
no, let's hear it. Let's hear it.
So there's all these women in the Ukraine that are taking up arms to fight, right? Well, there are transgenders that are trying to leave the country, and when they get to the border, they're being turned back because the border guards are saying, "You're not a woman, you're a guy. Get back and fight." Right?
Here's a gun.
Here's a gun. Yes, exactly.
Go to the
That's
front.
yes, that's exactly what they're saying. So when an emergency happens, when truth interferes with this fantasy that is being created,
Right.
you're going to have the truth blown up.
And there's no place for it in that environment.
Exactly.
Live or die.
Yep.
So I see Bibi Netanyahu is back on the scene again, and he's talking about the deal with Iran. I think no one else. I think
Yep.
Naftali Bennett is not qualified to stand up and talk about this. But he, I think they did a couple interviews with him, and he came out and spoke out against Biden's push towards, reinitiating the whole deal with Iran.
Well, not only that, he is taking. So Donald Trump put the Iranian Guard on the terrorist watch list. Rightly so. They were killing our soldiers. Now the Biden administration is trying to take them off the terrorist watch list. And it's nonsensical, right? What people don't realize is, Biden is trying to do this nuclear deal with Iran, but who is the intermediary? Who's the facilitator? Russia, whom is supposedly this terrible people that are at war, right? But we're going to trust them to broker a deal between us and Iran on nuclear weapons of all things. So it's insane. It is absolute. This whole administration just makes no sense.
If you look at it from a very broad perspective, it makes sense in the context of the chaos that they are trying to impose upon humanity. It makes sense what they're doing. But if you look at it from an even broader perspective, it's God. God's orchestrating every bit of it. He's directly involved in it. I was speaking with someone yesterday, and I told them that, in Revelation chapter 17, when the world political order and the world religious order destroys the economy, it's done because God put it in their hearts to do it. That's Revelation chapter 17. So that speaks to the reality that God is behind this. And these absurd things that we're seeing in the world today, they're not happening outside of God's authority and governance. So I would say to the people that are listening that are concerned about a possible nuclear war, or even worse, and there is worse, that God is in control. And according to what we see in Matthew chapter 24, in conjunction with other places in the Bible, God will not allow this to go too far. He will hold it back. He will intervene, and we need his intervention. You see, God is bringing this potpourri of humanity's melee and madness to the point where all of humanity will know that we have only one choice, one option that's actually viable, which is God's intervention. In other words, God's intervention is going to become so needed and so clear. I just know that that's where we're going, where humanity will come to value God's intervention and see it as the only hope. Will the kings of the world take that position? No. The world's kings will refuse such a prospect. That's what they're fighting against.
Yep.
So we solved all the problems of the world. We can move right on.
I don't know. We put light on all the problems of the world. We didn't really solve anything. Jesus will solve everything
Absolutely.
at His coming. So we have a question. I think it's a pretty good question. I think we've all banged around with this question previously. Could you define for me what it is to be a Judeo-Christian? How does this differ from just being a Christian? My experience with the term, it comes up on television every now and then. They talk about Judeo-Christian foundations of faith.
Yeah, right.
Statements like that.
So the question comes from me, actually, and I do a lot of conferences, right? So where I man the booth, I do demos, I talk to people, I try to sell our product, and I have the hi. And on more than one occasion, someone's come up to me, and I have very limited time, right?
That one right there?
Right here, yeah.
With the Opel, very standoffish.
Must be Spanish of you. You can't say hi.
Hi. And people come up to me, right? And I was at a conference last month, and this man comes up to me, and we start talking about our product. And in the middle of the discussion, he sees it, right? Mm-hmm. And he goes, "Oh, Boker Tov," and we start talking, right? And he's Jewish, and he immediately assumes that I am Jewish. Now, my time with this man is like this big because I have other people I have to try to sell to. And it's happened more than once. And I'm like, how do I explain this? Because
in 5 seconds.
Brevity.
In 5 seconds. Because if you talk to the average person on the street, they just think we're crazy, right?
Yeah.
I often lead with, well, I'm a heretic because, and I just go with it because I know how conventional Christianity is. And when you say I'm a Christian, they think of traditional conventional Christianity, replacement theology, all that other stuff, right? So I'm like, how do I explain this? And
even the traditional Christianity has a Judaic root.
Right.
But they're doing everything they can do to deny it.
Yes.
Well, they cut that root off completely. If we reflect on what Paul said, they're separate from the root. In Romans chapter 11, right? They've cut themselves off completely. We can go so many places with this, Let's just cut through all the religious, doctrinal gobbledygook stuff. A Judeo-Christian is someone who values their foundation, their biblical foundation, as believers in Messiah Jesus, as it relates to Israel. I can say it that way. I can say it many, many ways. Christians who've come to appreciate their historic foundation. This is an ancient movement. Mm-hmm. Now, as this development began in the first century, the Nazarene believers who were Jewish and Gentile believers of the first, second, third century, I read once, I was doing some deep historical research on the whole subject, and in the 5th century, a Catholic, this is Byzantine, but a Catholic historian said that, there was a time for 4 centuries, Christianity was known as Hanatzrim.
Right.
The Christians were known as Hanatzrim. And he said it. But he was also saying that now we have this new movement that has superseded every other Christian movement, and our goal is to consolidate all of it where there would be no more fragmentation within the movement, and so that's what we represent, the consolidation of all Christian faiths. We are the savior of Christianity, which is what Constantine said, right?
Right.
Well, not said, but that's what they said of Constantine.
Right.
After Nicaea, he saved Christianity because Christianity was so fragmented. And so we needed the Byzantine to put an army together to come up into Israel and crush everyone, go everywhere around the ancient world and crush everyone that was outside of their pale of stuff. And that's what Christianity needed. That's what Orthodox Christianity says. Now, so biblical Christianity, following the Byzantine oppression, went into subjugation, went into hiding for centuries upon centuries. Some really profound heretical movements came out of that. But there was always a core of believers who remained faithful to the Word of God, who remained faithful to Torah and stayed with the Hebraic foundation of their faith. Always, there always were, in hiding many of the times. But after the Reformation, when the Bible became liberated, what happened? Believers who were Hebraic-minded felt like this was their passport to come out from their hiding, and we see throughout Europe many movements of Christians who were saying, "This is it. We are restorationists," and a restorationist in today's vernacular is a Zionist, a Christian Zionist.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So the restorationist movement really took off after the 1500s, after the Reformation. So you can look at a Judeo-Christian as someone, a believer in Messiah Jesus, who recognizes, appreciates, and most important, identifies with their Hebraic foundation, the reality of Israel being the rich root of the olive tree. The rich root actually comes from God, but Israel is the olive tree. And if we can take the words of Paul and say, well, we're just wild branches grafted in, then that's the basis of being a Hebraic Christian. We're wild branches grafted into the rich olive tree.
To some extent, you can blame the printing press, which was developed around the same time as Luther wrote his 95 Theses. But it also made it so that the Bible could be translated into languages and printed in it. People could have their own copy of the Bible, which previously you had to go to the synagogue or to the church and hear it read.
So in the mid-1400s in Lisbon, Portugal, the first public press came into existence, and it was put together by Jews. And so in Lisbon, Portugal, the Jews of Portugal began to print, Bibles. And of course, it went from Portugal into the whole Reformation thing, and the Reformation really began to work on, the Gutenberg Bible and so on. Really began to work. But you're right, it was the printing press that was invented by the Jews of Portugal, Lisbon, that brought this whole Reformation movement front and center. So God used that initial press that was made in Lisbon, Portugal, in His purpose.
But I get two reactions, right?
Right.
I get people who just assume that I am Jewish, right?
Right.
I took a trip to Amsterdam and I wanted to go to Anne Frank's house, and the person I was with didn't want to go to Anne Frank's house, right? So we went to the museum instead, right? We had a day off from work and we went to the museum instead. So when we got back, he told his wife, yeah, she wanted to go to Anne Frank's house, but we didn't go. And his wife goes, well, you know why she wanted to go to Anne Frank's house. And the whole thought process was that I was Jewish, and that's why I wanted to go to Anne Frank's house. Right?
Yeah.
So I get that. And then on the other side, I feel like I've been robbed, because every descriptor that we can use, like Nazarene, would have been normal, except that there is the Church of the Nazarene, which is main.
Well, and there's Messianic groups using that terminology also.
Yeah,
yes.
Nazarene and
right.
Yeah. And well, I think it's important, if you really want to understand the Hebraic foundation of our faith, to go back, look at the book of Acts. Halfway through the book of Acts, you begin to see the emergence of the Nazarene church. Paul said it concerning the way of the Nazarenes, right? Mm-hmm. And Jesus said to Paul on the road to Damascus, Ani Yeshua HaNatzra, I am Jesus, the branch. Right. The word Natzra is branch. So the word Nazarene is plural, right? The branches.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I am the vine, you are the branches, he said. And so the Nazarene movement really took off in that period. So if you really want to understand more about the branches, the HaNatzrim, you really have to dig into first century Christianity, not in Rome.
Right.
Because that's where the apostasy began.
Right.
You got to dig into first century Christianity in the Golan, in the outskirts of Jerusalem and Judea, because the Christianity, the Ha-Nazari movement of Judea was subjugated by the Romans, right? Because they were considered Jews.
Right.
But they moved into the Golan, to Gilgal, further north into Syria, and into North Africa as well. And even into the desert. Many, many Christian movements went into the wilderness. And there is historical material that you could dig into to identify these people. And it's a real historical narrative. It's there. And you can begin to understand the mentality of these Christians that Catholic theologian spoke about in the 5th century.
Right.
It's there for us to understand. So I think this is an important question. And the question really also can come from a place of asking, how far do I go with this Hebraicness, Judeo-ness? How far do I just say, okay, give myself a title, a Judeo-Christian, and just stop right there? Do I use that terminology, that title when it's convenient, or do I flaunt it?
Speaking from our experience of years and years, when we first realized that we were being hoodwinked by Christianity, we stepped away from that and we were screaming for identity because you're all of a sudden not that.
Right.
And so we became overtly Jewish for a time. Long tzitzit, yarmulkes.
Yeah, I went through a spell of that, but it was the Holy Spirit that said, no, you're not Jewish.
Well, he worked it out of all of us along the way.
So, yeah,
but
absolutely.
It's easy to go too far.
Right.
Oh, that's it.
Yes,
yeah.
absolutely.
So could we use the word balance? I don't like the word balance.
Yeah. Right.
I read somewhere recently that it used to be that an analysis of someone who was psychotic is someone who can only see black and white.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it used to be that way. They would run you through a battery of tests, and if you see things in a very black and white way, then you have some sort of a psychotic
But all prophets are
issue.
black and white.
Well, Jesus, the Bible, Jesus is pretty black and white.
Pretty black and white.
So, and that's how I see things. That's how I've always seen things. And so I don't like the word balance, because balance implies that you can sort of merge the left and the right. You can merge black and white and end up with gray. Well, Jesus referred to that as being lukewarm.
Yeah.
And of course, the word balance is being used in the occult a lot, in the
Okay.
New
Right,
Age movement.
yes,
It's used a lot, and it's valued, balance. So I'm not saying there has to be a balance. You have to be fully a branch grafted in to the olive tree, or fully broken off.
Right.
And that's black and white. I'm using Paul's words now, right?
Right.
He had no middle ground for his statement. He said, you're either a wild branch grafted in, or you're broken off. You choose.
But
So-
it's almost impossible to talk to people, right? Because if I say, I don't eat pork, I don't eat shellfish, I try to be kosher, they think, ooh,
You're under the law.
yes, it just makes me insane. I'm like, no. And there's no path, there's no way to explain it to them.
You're only under the law if you think that eating kosher makes you an automatic acceptance before
Right.
God.
Right. And then you try to tell them there is such richness in the festivals. You have no idea what you traded when you traded Passover for Easter.
Right.
There's nothing in Easter.
You must be one of those
Sugar.
radical,
You got it.
legalistic, under bondage people.
Yeah.
Yeah, I understand. So
It's impossible to talk to people. Right?
So in that regard, as it relates to our Hebraic foundation, we being wild branches grafted in, if the biblical festivals, God's festivals, were given to Israel, okay, so they're not Israel's festivals, they're God's festivals, very clearly stated as such. God gave them his festivals. He wanted Israel to celebrate his festivals. Whenever they did, things went well. Whenever they didn't, calamity would follow.
Right.
The festivals themselves is like a parameter of God's goodness and mercy as you celebrate them. That's what we see historically with Israel in the Bible. So God's festivals. The church comes along and says, those are Jewish festivals. We
Right.
want to disconnect. any connection to the Jewish people. The church at Laodicea in 369 AD or something said, Jewishness, ooh, we don't want anything to do with the Jewish festivals. In fact, we would do away with those and the Shabbat, the Sabbath, and we will invent a new Sabbath. We like Sunday because it's a good day to worship the sun god, and we will bring in some other festivals. Pagan, so what? We'll make them Christian, and that's what they did. So who really is in bondage?
Right.
If you can't let your pagan identity, your pagan heritage go and embrace what is biblical, I ask the question again, who is really in bondage?
Yep.
You know, the story of Ruth and Oprah, right?
Right.
Oprah was in bondage. Why? She couldn't walk away from her pagan history. She had to go back to it. Whereas Ruth, her testimony was, where you go, I will go. Your God will be my God. Where you lie down, I will lie down. Your people shall be my people. You're talking about Ruth, a Moabitess, who completely gave herself over to being Israeli. And she, as a result of that, won an everlasting testimony as being the vessel through which Boaz, the kinsman redeemer, brought redemption to Naomi, a type of Israel. The typology is so clear. But what happened to her sister or her sister-in-law, Oprah? She went back to being a pagan. She was in bondage, whereas Ruth was set free,
Right.
and set free in order to be the vessel of redemption. You see, so if that allegorical picture isn't valuable and pertinent to what we're talking about, I don't know what is. So the church in Laodicea, at the council of Laodicea and Nicaea and every other council, said, hey, we're going back to Moab. We don't want anything to do with Bethlehem. Naomi, Ruth, you go. We're going to stay here in the pagan world.
Right. But you know, they've done that with everything. I'm in Deuteronomy now, I believe, in Leviticus, and the laws, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you compare God's laws with what man has made, right? God made these laws as a hedge, as an indicator of how we're to treat each other, and it is perfect, right? And in particularly, you know, the law about the woman who is raped, and if she's in the country, you know, what happens to the man, and if she's in the city, what happens to the man, right? In the city, the man would get killed because theoretically, you know, if she's raped, and people would look.
She had to cry out.
Right. And people would look at that and claim, oh, God is sanctioning rape, right? And the answer is no, he's not sanctioning rape. He is being just to both parties depending on the situation. But in our society,
Right.
people will get off with rape, period. And
Right.
sometimes even the women will be mistreated rather than using something so simple and so easy to determine right and wrong, right? So people get all caught up on because it's sin speaking, right? They get all caught up
well,
on it.
they hinge on something that Paul said that is biblical. Paul was not unbiblical when he said, by the works of the law can no one be justified. Paul was addressing a very specific situation concerning justification by faith. The Bible is clear, the just shall live by faith. Abraham believed God and became just. So the just shall live by faith. You're not justified by the works of the law at all, but doesn't nullify the law.
Right.
You know, not at all. So being justified simply means that you've believed God, like Abraham believed God, you've believed God, and because of that belief, because of that faith, God has justified you. As a result, you're reconciled to God. Reconciliation comes as you're justified to God. So it's a reality, but it doesn't do away with the law. The need to be observant of the Bible is negated by the fact that you are not justified by the law.
Right.
So it's
just very frustrating, right? Like,
yeah.
I
well,
remember when I
what you're dealing with is we've had 1,500 years of conventional Christianity that has etched its way into the hearts of all conventional Christians, and I once said that it's demonic.
Yep.
Doctrine of demons have crept its way into the church, and it's like a demonic stronghold. And if you touch upon the foundations of their pale of doctrine, if you interfere with any of those issues, like the Trinity, replacement theology, law, and so on, then you will incur the wrath of the demons that runs the Christian landscape. I mean, runs the Christian landscape. And then you would know the resistance. But you're dealing with the same thing that the first century, second century, the Nazarene church of that period had to deal with. You have the same perspective. You're rightly associated with that church movement of the first 3 centuries.
Yep.
You're in good standing. You're where every Christian should be.
I know the exact moment when God wiped all that out of me, right? I was in Israel. It was first Shabbat that we experienced in Israel, my very first Shabbat in Israel. And I went through that Shabbat, and at the end of the day, I'm like, what fool would give this up? I'm like, why would you ever give this up? It was the best time ever. It was peaceful. It was comfortable. You talked to people. It was great. And I'm like, why would you trade this in? For what? So that on a Saturday morning you can get up and mow your lawn and wash your car and do your laundry and all that other stuff? It's insane.
And that's just Shabbat. There's so much more there for us.
Anyway.
Right.
So our Judeo-Christianity is a reality. I think I would venture to say that the vast, vast majority of people that call themselves Judeo-Christians are totally unaware of what it is to be truly Judeo-Christians, being that wild branch grafted in. The vast majority of them have no understanding. But, you know, if we feel like we have a better understanding, a better appreciation, it's incumbent upon us. It's our responsibility to declare these things and to teach them. And so that's what we're doing right now. But
in a couple of minutes or less.
your challenge is to be able to convey that.
Yes, very
fast. In a couple minutes or less.
Yes.
We had a little kid that went here years ago, and when he got asked that question, he said, "We go to the Jewish Church of Christ." So if you want to leave them standing there with their mouth open, that'll work.
Yeah, it's something that you have to. I'm not going to recommend that you build your talking points. I'm going to recommend that you have conceptually the reality of what we're talking about. And so if it's conceptual in you, then you can speak from many angles concerning this. And we all ought to be able to do it. We're dealing with 1,500 years of doctrinal stronghold that would manifest in someone that whose Christianity is being challenged. Because that's what you represent.
Yeah.
You represent a challenge. Yeah, you represent a challenge to their Christianity. And you would see very quickly that 1,500-year-old demonic thing pop right out, and it's going to attack you.
Right. Much too much of a bother to them to actually have to search the scriptures to see what is true. Yeah. And hired a pastor or a priest with a degree in theology so he can go look up all those questions on their behalf.
Yeah. Who has been taught by conventional
right,
Christians
to
skip
bought
all those sections that are...
Bought the lies, hook, line, and sinker.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a question that every Christian needs to deal with. And I think we live in the time when it becomes a much more appropriate question, much more relevant today than ever before, because the reason for that is simple. We see today that God has restored the people of Israel to the land of Israel. Whenever that happens in the Bible, it's pointing to a culmination of events that will ultimately bring about God's kingdom in the earth. So that's the reality of where we are right now. We're seeing the foundation, the makings of this great conversion of the epoch where God will establish his king in the earth. It's exciting times. To be able to convey, that's the challenge that you're talking about. Well, you study, you show yourself approved by studying, and you allow the Holy Spirit to speak through you. Jesus said, don't take thought for what you will say, but just go. And when you speak, believe, have confidence that the Holy Spirit will speak through you, and he will. But you're dealing with a very ancient, spiritual, I think, demonic stronghold. Why do I say it's a demonic stronghold? Because what happened at Nicaea? this is where it all began, right? Council of Nicaea, 325 AD. What happened? Well, the bishops or the pastors of the leading church movements at that time, under the Roman Pax Romana, all of these bishops came up to Nicaea, and they yielded themselves, they literally surrendered themselves to Constantine. Who was Constantine? He was a savior of Christianity? No, he was a pagan god. Let's be frank about it.
Right.
Constantine was a pagan god, king, emperor, who was worshipped as such. He was Jupiter. He worshipped the god Jupiter, who in Greek mythology was Zeus.
Right.
If you know anything about Greek mythology, you know that Zeus translates to Satan. Zeus is the god that gives strength to man. He was worshipped on Mount Olympus, where men were given strength, and this is the characteristic of Zeus. Zeus became Jupiter in the Roman pantheon, and Constantine, to his death, worshipped and venerated Jupiter. In fact, if you go to Nicaea today, which is Constantinople, there's the Arch of Constantine, and in the ancient world, there was a chariot on top of the Ark of Constantine, and way behind it, out in the foreground, he had, in the background, he had a statue of Jupiter behind it. And when you approach the tongue, you approach the Arch of Constantine, his head on that chariot comes and converges with the head of Jupiter right before you enter into Nicaea. What was Constantine saying? He was saying, I am the manifestation of Jupiter. And I'm not just making that up. He said those things, that he was the manifestation of Jupiter. This is Constantine, and he presided over the modern Christian movement. He was the one who made final decisions about how things will go. So let's put it this way. At Nicaea, the church that has become the conventional church today worshipped Jupiter. They literally bowed down to Constantine, gave him an illustrious title, Constantine, the savior of Christianity. They worshipped Zeus. They worshipped the God that gave strength to man. How can that not be demonic? How can that not have a profound spiritual lasting effect? Obviously it did. And that's what we encounter when you receive that challenge. You're dealing with the spirit of Constantine that goes all the way back to the man Constantine who worshipped Jupiter.
Yeah,
Believed that he was Jupiter.
Yeah, it's easy to see the church at Nicaea traded freedom and truth for security, right?
Security, right? They wanted a Pax Romana religion, and they got it.
Benjamin Franklin warned us about, right?
Yeah, so it's breaking away from that can be difficult. Seeing yourself as Judeo is important, but go all the way with it. Don't look for that happy medium. Don't look for the balance. Go all the way with it, where you are a Hebraic believer in Messiah Jesus. You're grafted into the rich olive tree, and in that you have your identity. You know, the words identity is thrown around a lot, right?
Right.
I identify as this, I identify as that. Well, we've been using the word identity for a long time. We identify with the rich olive tree. We identify with Israel.
Which is Israel. So we identify with being Jewish.
Right.
Now, our Jewish friends, they don't see us as Jewish, but it matters how God sees us, not how they see us.
So the olive tree is there. We're seeing it today. And prophetically, from a eschatological point of view, we're seeing that Jesus referred to the olive tree. When you see the olive tree blossom and prepare to give its fruit, its leaves and its fruit, know for sure that the summer is near. Israel is the olive tree, and we're seeing that today. Mm-hmm. How much more then must we see ourselves grafted into that olive tree today? A graft on a tree is a very important thing. No one grafts a tree for no good reason.
Right.
Why would someone graft a tree?
It's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work. But
better fruit.
To produce a particular fruit. So the grafter of this tree, who is God, he is looking for a distinct fruit that graft will produce. Right? That's why you graft a tree. So the grafting in process is very important. We live in a time when the fig tree has blossomed. Now, going from a fig tree to an olive tree, but it's the same thing. Israel is referred both as the fig tree and the olive tree. But the fig tree has blossomed, and there's this graft that we're supposed to be. Yeah, we're Judeo-Christians, but we have to be that branch that's grafted in, which goes way beyond saying that you're Judeo-Christian. Many people say that they're Judeo-Christian when it's convenient.
Right.
As it relates, in many cases, to evangelizing Jews, right?
Right.
If you want to foot in regards to Jewish evangelism, you say, I'm a Judeo-Christian. You can trust me, I'm a Judeo-Christian. Have you heard that before? Have you witnessed that before?
I haven't personally.
I have.
Okay.
I have.
I believe you.
I've picked it up in many people. They become Judeo-Christians when it's relevant to the possibility of evangelizing Jews.
Right.
Horrible.
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 Deceptive.
It's deceptive. It should never be.
So they ask, what would Jesus do? WWJD. What would Jesus do? First of all, he would never be deceptive or manipulative.
Yeah. So that's who we're supposed to be.
Celebrate Hanukkah.
And Passover.
And Passover.
And Sukkot. And Shavuot.
So the last part of your question, how does this differ from just being Christian, right? Which is what you asked me on Sunday.
Yeah, I think we
It differs quite a bit. There's a gulf, actually, between what we're talking about being truly Judeo-Christian to the extreme right. We've got to be extreme right. So on the extreme right, you have Judeo-Christians. On the extreme left, you have just Christians. Again, it goes back to Oprah and Ruth. So for our friends, if all of this is too confusing, the allegorical picture is not making sense to you, if that's the case, I want you to pay attention to our programs, and you will learn more as we go along. We don't posture ourselves as being, great theologians. We're not theological giants, and really we're not. But we know the Bible. The Bible is pretty clear. It's easy to follow along the theology of the Bible. It's man's theology that makes things difficult and creates the traps.
Right, and confuses people between which one is true.
Mm-hmm.
Right, absolutely. So we're breaking, we're opening the traps. There are no traps in our doctrine. We point directly to the Word of God. Yes, there is an analogous picture that brings us to the story of Ruth, the church that identifies with Israel, the church that sees itself grafted into the rich olive tree is in fact Ruth. There is the reality of Oprah, the sister of Ruth, who chose to go back to her pagan foundation. That's conventional Christianity. And the story is very vivid. Oprah goes on to do nothing relative to God and his kingdom, whereas Ruth goes on to be the chief instrument of God's redemption that comes to Naomi, again, who is a type of Israel. So let me encourage you to search these things out, see for yourself, and have this conviction in you that we live in the time when Ruth must stand up, when she must take her position. This is that time. God's looking for the wild branches because he wants a very specific fruit.
So it's the wrong time of the year, but I'm going to seize the opportunity here based upon what Pastor has said to promote our classes. We have an institute here that takes our students through the Bible in a 2-year time frame. And it's a structured course, but it allows you to read the scriptures for yourself, and it allows the scriptures to speak to you and reveal to you what is God's plan. And his plan of redemption for the whole earth. So we would encourage people to engage in that coursework and to go through the complete Bible in a 2-year time frame and to see what it really says. And we also want to share with you, elder of our congregation has written a new book entitled The Counterfeit Kingdom by Larry Dorsick. And he deals with a lot of the subjects that we're talking about. And so it would be beneficial also to get a hold of that book. It's available online, any resource. There's a ton of booking resources out there. You can You can go to Amazon and Barnes & Noble and Books A Million, and there's just a lot of them. Search, so you can Google search The Counterfeit Kingdom, and it'll come up right away. We also are hosting a Passover Seder for the community on April the 7th. It begins at 6:30 p.m. Tickets are available online. $20 for adults, I think $12 for children. And so that's open, and seats are going quickly. So make those reservations while you're thinking about it. And if you have questions that you'd like to submit to us, if the questions that we've discussed have raised other questions in your thinking, you're welcome to share them with us. If you're on our website, you can do that right on our website. If you're not, you can send us an email at voice@buildupzion.org. Again, that's voice@buildupzion.org. And until next week, shalom.